Hey, so if you're wondering what we're doing in our home as opposed to at the church, and this is a sermon, well, we experienced some technical difficulties with the sermon recording, but it does pick up later on. So we're just going to redo the first little part of the sermon, and then all of a sudden, we're going to be at the church. So hopefully that's not too weird, but we just wanted to, fill in the gaps and have it be so that, the next part will make sense. Okay. So we've been in this marriage series for a little bit. And one thing is that what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about emotions. And this particular talk definitely, of course, relates to marriage. But if you're not married and you're watching this, I'd encourage you, don't check out immediately. Because what we're going to talk about is going to be relevant whether it's in a relationship of marriage or if it's in a relationship with a friend or a family member, your work. This is a skill that you could use and apply kind of across the board, any type of relationship. Mm-hmm. Now, for the last 2 weeks, Roger and even the first week, Glow was with Roger, and they have talked about marriage. And one of the things that I would say, if you kind of boiled it down to one statement, that what's been covered over these last 2 weeks would be that they talked about getting your needs met from Christ as opposed to getting your needs met from each other. Mm-hmm. And when our needs are met from Christ, then our responses to outward situations and people begins to change. And it really sets us up for a lot of freedom. We now have a choice to respond out of our spirit rather than out of our flesh. But often, or in order to respond out of our spirit, we have to have tools that enable us to do that. And what we're going to talk about in the way that we handle emotions within this marriage relationship, this is going to be one of those tools to help us break flesh patterns and break those kind of responses. And so far in this series, it's really been talking about kind of an individual's role within the marriage. It's your responsibility to get your needs met from God, not from your spouse. And so it's kind of a working on yourself. When we start talking about emotions and the feelings that are aroused within this relationship, that's really two people involved in that. Because what happens with emotions is our emotions are either aroused by our spouse, they're taken out on our spouse, or what we hope at the end of this is that you'll use those to build a bridge with your spouse. Forgot. I wanted to give this quote. This is something that Jeff Van Vonderen said. He said, "To tell you about my thoughts is to locate myself in a category, but to tell you my feelings is to tell you about me."
So when we're first starting this out, we want to really lay some groundwork and talk about a few facts about emotions. And the first is that feelings are facts, obviously. Right. We all have them. We all have emotions. But a lot of times we really tend to view them as the enemy. And we say things like, don't let your feelings get in the way of the facts, or we shouldn't be feeling the way that we're feeling, feelings, emotions cloud our judgment, or we can't trust them because they will lie to us. And, these are all really, really common views about emotions. And there is actually some truth to all of these statements, but there's also a lot of misconception in these statements too. And so really what we want to do is to bring some different ways of thinking towards emotions that would kind of run contrary to a lot of these typical views. Yeah. And the first and most basic thing is that emotions are very important. They're not to be discounted. We shouldn't be controlled by them, but they do need to be addressed and they do need to be dealt with. And a lot of times we just want to say, oh, my feelings aren't important. And that is a lie from the enemy. And the emotions that you may have to like any given circumstance may be inappropriate to the circumstance that you're in, but they're not going to be inappropriate to your perception of the circumstance. For instance, like if I'm walking down a sidewalk and out of the corner of my eye, I see something black and fast coming this way at me. And immediately my mind, because I have a fear of bugs, my mind immediately goes, oh, it's a bug. And I'll jump back to get out of the way, or, my heart starts beating hard, and, I want to avoid that situation and run away. Well, of course, a split second later, I'll see that it, in fact, wasn't a bug. It was a leaf. My response was definitely inappropriate to the circumstance, but it was not inappropriate to my perception of the circumstance.
Exactly. And emotions aren't premeditated. Like when she reacted, Tina hadn't thought in advance, just in case I ever see a leaf that I think is a bug, I got to make sure to jump in panic. You don't premeditate your emotions. They are an involuntary response to your perception of outward circumstances. We bottle up what we see as our less socially acceptable feelings, and we pretend they don't exist. And this is especially true in the church. People come up to us and they say, how are you doing? And we just say we're fine. And we don't want to tell people, hey, my life is really hard and my life's falling apart, or, whatever's going on. We just want to say we're fine. And sometimes I understand that because, like at church, maybe it's, you're in a hurry. The service is just about to start. You just don't have time for a conversation like that. And maybe that's a talk for a different time about being honest in that. But what I can say is in our marriage, we can't bring that over. And really, we should be honest in every aspect, in every area of our lives. I understand that we might have times of sharing deeper with certain people. And that would be especially true with your spouse. So, but we do it, and we're so accustomed to doing it, maybe at church or at our work or at places where we put on these faces, that we come home and we do this with our spouses. And we bottle up these feelings and we just pretend that they don't exist, and we don't even know that we're doing it, but they do exist. You do feel what you feel.
Mm-hmm. And if you have a relationship with someone, that means you have emotions with that person.
Right.
We cannot have any relationship. We have no relationship with someone that we have no emotions with. Acquaintances might be somebody that you don't really have an emotion towards. You don't really have a relationship towards them either. Now, the emotions that you may have towards someone may be like heavy emotions, but it is still a relationship that you have with them.
Right.
So when I say heavy emotions, what am I talking about? So these would be like emotions like anger, jealousy, frustration, fear. These are the feelings that, like Ryan said earlier, that we see as less socially acceptable. We would call these bad emotions. These are, and sometimes we would even see them as immoral emotions, and we feel guilty or ashamed that we have them. And so we feel that it is our responsibility to hide those emotions from other people and only experience them in secret when we're by ourselves. So the opposite of that would be obviously light emotions. Light emotions would be things that we don't mind sharing, that we like to share with other people, and we definitely see those as more socially acceptable. Being happy, excited, love, calmness. These are the things that we want to share, and these are outward things, and so we call these good emotions. So we use good and bad to describe emotions, and it puts them, they're morally based words. And light and heavy is really a much better way to describe emotions, and that's what we're going to be using during this talk. Light and heavy emotions, it's really a better descriptor. And you'll see what we talk about as we go on, because the truth is, there really is no such thing as a bad emotion.
And that's because emotions in and of themselves do not have morality. In other words, happy is not a good moral emotion, and anger is not a bad immoral emotion. Jesus experienced many of the heavier emotions. He experienced anger with the Pharisees. We see that when he flips over the money changers' tables at the temple. He had sadness, deep grief with Lazarus, I can't say his name today. When he passed away, Jesus wept, and he wept over Jerusalem for the disbelievers that were there. at another time. We saw him have great stress when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and it says he sweated blood. We've actually seen that in modern day with people who, when they get stressed out and the little vein in their forehead starts going. But when people get really stressed, if the capillaries up here break, they actually sweat blood. And that's what was happening to Jesus because he was under a significant amount of stress. We see him get frustrated in Matthew 17 when the disciples were unable to heal a boy. And he says, how much longer do I have to put up with this perverse generation? And we see frustration come out in him. See, using good and bad to describe our feelings automatically attaches the concept of morality to them. But emotions don't have morality. You feel what you feel. They are an involuntary response. Choices have morality. What we do with the feelings that we have, but the feelings themselves don't have morality. See, we need to demoralize emotions to give us permission to talk about them. We have emotions because God has emotions. Jesus said, if you see me, you've seen the Father. We just went through a list of emotions he had, and there were a lot more. He experienced joy and laughter and all these different kinds of emotions. So we know that God has emotions, and we were created in his image. And, when we start ascribing morality to emotions, it inhibits us from being free and open to talk about them. I don't want to admit that I have fear or I have frustration or I have anger because then that makes me an immoral or a bad person, or I'm less of a person if I have these bad emotions. Well, emotions don't have morality, so we are free to experience them and have them. It's just the choices that we make of what to do with them that has morality. So good, bad, moral, immoral. Emotions cannot be any of these things, but what they can be is we can have wasted emotions. Mm-hmm. Now, a wasted emotion is what happens when we don't take advantage of them, when we don't use whatever feelings we have in our relationship in order to build a bridge and to build that relationship strength up with our spouse.
Yeah. Feelings are not a measure of spirituality, and that's something that I think we all just need to practice at and learn and really get into our thinking, is that feelings are not a measure of spirituality. Now, for ourselves, when you're talking about, looking at yourself, we tend to ignore our feelings a lot. And when we ignore our feelings, though, what we're actually doing is we're actually ignoring the way that God made us.
Right.
Because, it does say in Genesis 1:26 that we're made in his image. And in 1 Thessalonians, it talks about the fact that we're made in spirit, we're made spirit, soul, and body. And if you've been at Grace for any length of time, you've heard Pastor Roger talk about this. He has the circle diagrams where it has the spirit, soul, and body. We're a 3-part being. And part of that 3-part is the soul. And within our soul is our emotions. All of these things, all parts of us are made by God, and they're made in his image. So if God created our emotions, that means that we're supposed to have emotions. And so when we ignore them, we are denying a part of who we are. We're denying how God created us. But when we acknowledge them, what we're doing is that we're giving ourselves permission to feel. We're giving ourselves permission to be who God has created us to be, and allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling. And so when we're talking about, that's when we're talking about ourselves, when we're talking about, towards others. So basically, we shouldn't judge someone for the way that they're feeling. If someone is scared, or if someone is jealous, or if they're angry or nervous or whatever, sometimes we might think to ourselves, well, they must not be a very good Christian, or their faith is weak, or their faith is low. And that is actually judging others. They're judging their feelings as a part of their spirituality. And that's something that we shouldn't be doing.
So we can use emotions to either build bridges that strengthen our relationship, or we can use them to build walls that separate and push our relationship farther apart. One of the ways that we can use them to build bridges is when we connect through those emotions. I remember about 2.5 years ago, our dog Gracie passed away, and we were very sad. She was more than just a pet to us. She was like, she was a member of our family, and so we both had a lot of deep grief about this. Well, one of the things that we did was we talked to each other about it, and we said exactly how we were feeling each day. When we asked, how are you doing? We gave open, honest answers as to how we were feeling. And we never judged the other. And if one of us took longer, or one of us was having a bad day and one a good day, we never judged the other one, but we always created a safe space where we were free to share our feelings. No matter if we felt ridiculous for having some of those feelings, we never felt ashamed to say it to each other. So there was this safe space made. And something that we noted in the midst of this grief, and we weren't trying for this at the time, we were just simply trying to, we were just living life.
Trying to get through
honestly, is that we became closer to each other. And it wasn't because we experienced a tragedy together or something like that. It was simply because we opened up to each other and we built bridges with our feelings. Now, you can also use feelings to separate yourself by building walls between each one of us. And a good example of that is sometimes when I'm driving, I miss my turns. I have no idea why I'm like this. I just am. Sometimes when I'm driving, I'm paying attention to all the cars around me. I'm driving safely, but I just will look up and be like, where am I? And I don't.
Story.
So that happens to me frequently, but the worst is when it happens when I'm on the interstate, especially when I'm going out of town and you're driving down the interstate and you miss an exit. And then you look up and you're like, oh my gosh, it's 3 miles till the next exit, which means now I'm going 3 miles out of my way, except for then I got to get off the interstate and then get back on the interstate. So now it's 6 miles out of my way. Oh, we're going to be so late or whatever. And when that would happen to me, and I would do this, I would get so frustrated that I'd start to get angry. And when that would happen, then there would be several symptoms. The pedal would go a little bit farther down to the floor. Start driving a little faster. I start mumbling to myself. I start yelling about how this interstate is so stupid that it doesn't have exits every quarter mile like it should, or whatever it is that I'm upset. And I just do this, and I don't ever give a safe place. If Tina says something to me like, it doesn't matter, then I snap at her. Oh, it matters because we're just wasting time and we're wasting gas and we're wasting everything else. And, it's whatever. So when I would do that, instead of allowing myself to be vulnerable and saying, hey, this is how I'm feeling, and actually handling it correctly, I made a choice to handle it incorrectly. Now, then Tina, normally, what would happen is because I'm handling it incorrectly, she would also handle it incorrectly. And what she would do is go into complete silence because she doesn't want to be a part of all my frustration and my complaining and my whining and my yelling and whatever else. And I don't know why you didn't want to be a part of that.
Or victim too.
Or be a victim to it and have me snap at her. So the safest thing for her to do was just to shut down and go into silence. Well, when we would do that, we're now traveling in silence. We're not speaking to each other. I mean, in a very real way, right there, you could see that wall right between us at that moment. Now, of course, that wasn't like a huge, relationship ending thing that would happen. But, a little bit of that time after time after time, never dealing with it could be. Because you're slowly building this wall up. And eventually, at some point, when there's this complete wall built up between you, where's your relationship? And so we want to use our emotions to build bridges and not to build walls. When we build walls instead of bridges, that's mishandling your emotions, because there is a right way and a wrong way to handle our emotions. So
when we've been married for a long time. I'm not going to say how long, because that'll make me feel old. We have a thing that, come to find out, because I've told this story before, come to find out a lot of married couples actually have this very same thing, and I was kind of surprised, but we have this thing between us, and it's been for years and years, that we fold the towels differently. I fold them the right way, and he folds them the wrong way, or something like
Different
that.
way.
Different way.
Different way.
Well, this is how I have always viewed it in the past. I fold them wrong I fold them right and he folds them wrong. But really, it's just we fold them differently. Anyways, I would always get frustrated and upset when he would fold the towels, but he wouldn't fold them the way that I wanted him to fold them. I showed him how to fold them several times, and then each time that he would go to fold them again, he would fold them his way. And I'm like, I don't understand why he can't remember to fold the towels right. I mean, he is a very intelligent man. He's the smartest man I know, so I'm not really sure what the problem is. So this would be a way that I have mishandled my emotions, is that I basically, his mood became my mood. When he was frustrated, I would get frustrated. When he was content, I would let that make me feel good. I felt loved when he did something thoughtful to me, or I was disappointed if he let me down, things like this. This is what happens when we get our sense of well-being from our spouse, from how they respond to us and from what they say to us. And, we've all have experienced this, and we all experience these certain emotions whenever we're trying to get our needs met from our spouse, like what Roger was talking about last couple of weeks. Basically, what that is doing is you're putting your faith in outward opinions. In this case, outward opinion of a spouse, but it could be with any relationship, a friend, a parent, who knows. If you're putting your faith in your if they're in their outward opinion of you, this is what happens, and it becomes a cycle because you rely on them to make you okay. And then you will say anything and you will do anything to get the response that you need from them in order to make you feel okay. And there's all kinds of methods, of course, for doing this. There's, manipulation, there's accusations, guilt, outbursts, shame, silent treatment, things like this. All of these things are all mechanisms that we use to get the response from people that we need. And we don't even know that we're doing it most of the time. So that's the first way to mishandle our emotions is, of course, to justify them. I'm very justified in my annoyance that Ryan cannot seem to fold the towels correctly. And, he should remember how to fold them. That's just all there is to it. So I'm justifying my emotions. I have shown him at least 10 times over however long we've been married, 23 years. And so he should be able to remember. And so I am very justified in my emotions. The second way that we can mishandle them is, of course, to misidentify them. And this is actually kind of a big one. A lot of times we actually misidentify what it is that we're feeling. So, for instance, I'm getting better at it, but I still struggle with it sometimes. I tend to get angry or annoyed with Ryan when he just goes ahead and does something that I have said that I will do. Whether it's, finishing a job for a client, or whether it's, the laundry or mopping the floor, whatever it is, folding the towels. I would tend to get annoyed if he would just jump in and do those things for me. And really what is happening is I am feeling guilty. If I'm to be completely honest with myself, annoyance is not my root emotion here. Guilty would be one of my emotions that I'm feeling, because I'm feeling guilty for procrastinating. I didn't get this job done fast enough. And so now I'm feeling like Ryan is just sitting there doing this thing that I'm supposed to be doing. And all the while he's thinking to himself, why can't she just do what she said she was going to do? Why can't she do things in a timely manner? Oh my gosh, she's such a lazy person. This is what I'm thinking that he's thinking this whole time. And so these feelings of guilt are rising up in me. And then my anger comes out because I have to protect myself. So the truth is that the reason why I'm feeling these emotions is because, not in every single way, but in some ways, I'm obviously getting my identity from Ryan, from how he thinks of me, from what he thinks of me. Because in my mind, I'm thinking, if Ryan thinks that I am a lazy person, then I am a lazy person. And of course, that is a lie.
Well, the good news is It looks like the technical difficulties at the church have been resolved.
Yay!
So why don't you join with me back at the church and we'll finish up this message there. When we let our emotions out on others rather than using them as bridges, this is another way. I guess this is number 3. Yeah, third way that we let our emotions out on others rather than using them as bridges is, the third way we mishandle our emotions is letting them out on others rather than using them as bridges. You know, the feelings that you let out on your spouse may have nothing to do with them. Now, I want to get away a little bit from using the term let our feelings out, because you actually do want to let your feelings out. But there's a way that you can do it right and a way that you do it wrong. So I'm going to call it letting your feelings out crooked. So this would be something like, you hurt me, so I'm going to hurt you. That's letting your feelings out crooked. Another way would be, I was at work, I got angry, I got frustrated, but I couldn't do anything about it because, maybe it was my boss or something like that. And so I come home and I snap at my wife. Or I'm frustrated at someone else and I come home and I'm short now with Tina and doing something. Well, that's letting my feelings out crooked. Maybe there's a stressful situation, so you take a nap or you just get busy. That's avoidance. You're avoiding dealing with it. Maybe you make a joke at someone else's expense to deal with it. Or this is the worst. You go talk about it to someone else. That in a marriage relationship is a no. Now, I know that there are times when maybe you go to professional counseling or you go to your pastor or something to talk, but I'm talking about sitting around with your friends or your coworkers bad-mouthing your spouse because of some feelings that you had. That's what I'm talking about, okay? Not getting professional help. That's a big no in any relationship. If you want a relationship to be healthy, you don't talk to others about it, you talk to them about it, okay? So that would be letting your feelings out crooked. Another way would be hiding your feelings or doing a bunch of right works in order to prove that you're okay. That's called avoidance, and that is wrong. That looks like living your life on the outside completely different than on the inside. That's being absolutely torn up, frustrated, destroyed inside, and walk around going, hey, everything's fine, singing a little song, I'm happy, everything's perfect, and your life is falling apart. Okay, that's wrong. Ignoring your emotions. Emotions don't go away. They will build up until you let them out crooked. We're going to talk a little bit later on about when's the proper time to deal with strong emotions when they come, or heavy emotions. But what I can say is a lot of times what will happen is something can happen that can cause you to feel frustrated, angry, sad, whatever, and then you don't deal with it immediately, and a few hours pass or maybe a day passes, and now you're not really feeling it anymore. And so you think, okay, well, why bring it back up? Why deal with it now? Because it's gone, right? Until it happens again. Until something else triggers that same feeling. Now all of a sudden, there's 2 of them, and it will build up until eventually you're going to let those emotions out crooked. You don't want to be controlled by your feelings. If, let's say, Tina does something that makes me angry, and so now I have this emotion, or whatever it is that happens. I now have this emotion. Let's call that emotion a brick. If I take that brick and I hand it to Tina, she can take that brick, and we can deal with it, and we can talk it out. We can do something, and we'll get into handling emotions properly in just a minute. But let's say instead of handing that brick to her, I just hold it. And I maybe have a wheelbarrow next to me, so I just stick it in that wheelbarrow for storage for later on. And then she does something else, and I take that brick and I put it in there, and I keep doing this until I have, say, 537 bricks. And now she does it one more time, and I can't take that brick. So I take that wheelbarrow, and I just dump it on top of her. That could kill her. But that's what we do emotionally. I just am going to hoard these away and hoard these away until one day I've got a wheelbarrow full of this emotion, and now I'm just going to unleash it on her. All right? Don't do that. That's called dumping. Ways that we can dump can also include things like just kidding statements, where someone says
something and you fire back kind of an insult, but then you're like, "No, I was just kidding." There was some truth in it that you had to get out, but then you realized, I didn't really want to deal with this at this moment. I was just kidding. Now, we like to kid a lot in our household, so not every just kidding statement, but you know what I'm talking about. You know when that's happening. Another thing would be passive-aggressive behavior, like Tina refolding the towels in front of me. Actions of avoidance. Avoiding situations that would bring out emotions. You know that you've got to deal with something. There's going to be a very uncomfortable conversation that's going to come. So you just never have it, right? All of these things I'm putting in this category of dumping because what'll happen is every time that we avoid it, or we avoid that unpleasant conversation, or we leave a room and say, I'm just not going to deal with it. That's just collecting another brick and sticking it in your wheelbarrow. And eventually, you're going to dump it.
Marriage is a shared life between two people. I mean, you have shared experiences and you have shared emotions. And one thing to increase your relationship strength with your spouse is to not hide your emotions from them, because when you do that, like Ryan said, you're building a wall. You now have an area of your life that you're not sharing with them. And so we want to talk about handling these emotions properly. And one of the ways that we do it seems very obvious again, but maybe not so obvious, is actually to know how you feel. And this is very important. Know how you feel, not how you think you should feel, but how you actually feel. Because knowing how you actually feel is the first step in getting those emotions under control. It's not the whole process, but it is the first step. And we really just need to take the time to feel how we feel. I'm not talking about stewing or just laying in a cesspool of emotions or anything for a long time, but to just take the time to feel it, acknowledge it, maybe talk with the Lord about it. There's a good one. Just really acknowledge it to yourself and to the Lord. Okay, this is actually how I'm feeling. Give yourself permission to feel what you feel, because you were created to feel, remember. And this is very important, especially for guys, but girls too. Fine, good, and lousy are not feelings. These are not your real feelings. If this is the word that's coming up in your head, you have not reached how you're really feeling. So dig deeper. Heavy feelings, really any feelings, but especially heavy feelings, are not automatically relationship damaging. If I'm angry at Ryan, my anger is not what is damaging that relationship. How I handle that anger and how I talk to him about it or not talk to him about it may be relationship damaging, but the anger itself is not relationship damaging. And so handling emotions properly is how bridges are built. And this is how you can have a truly shared life in every area, not just outward in experiences, but also in your inward emotions and all this stuff. So with the towel story, it was like it wasn't that long ago, maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. I was standing in the kitchen and this had happened again, and I was getting angry, and I finally just stopped and I said, well, why is it that I get angry at him every single time? I've learned a lot more. I've learned to actually ask these questions now. Why am I really annoyed? Because honestly, the wrongness of how he folded the towels is not really the thing that bothered me. And I finally identified what actually really bothered me was the fact that he just didn't seem to care. He didn't seem to want to listen or care enough about what I wanted to process that and to remember it and to do it. And so that's what was the real reason why I was feeling annoyed. I had previously for years ignored the why behind my feelings, and then I was denying them. But when you deny them and you ignore them, that's when they control you instead of you controlling them. So you have to do something with them in order to control them. And so that's when I did something. I didn't fling them at him or throw them at him, but I identified what I was feeling, why I was feeling that way, and I was able to share it with Ryan, and we were able to have an open, honest conversation about it.
So the next way that you handle emotions properly is to work on them all along. It's easy to deal with one emotion, like that brick, but it's very difficult to deal with a lot of emotions, like the wheelbarrow full of bricks. In this towel story, one of the neat things about it is, well, there was kind of a win and a fail for Tina on it. We won't talk about me on that, but the one fail was that she did not immediately work on it. Okay, this was like, I don't know how many years in the making that she kind of had this going on. And this was not a huge thing, just as a focal story for this. But she didn't immediately work on it. It would have been better if she had immediately been able to identify what she was really feeling and then have this conversation. But when she did work on it, she didn't dump. When she talked to me about the towels and what she was feeling about it, she only dealt with the towels and what she was feeling about it. She didn't bring up anything else of, don't you remember and also besides the fact that you folded the towels wrong, you also, none of that. She gave me one brick, and it brought us closer together because we built a bridge with the feelings that she was having, and I began to understand her more and understood where she was coming from and everything, and so I started folding the towel correctly.
He has folded them my way ever since.
The next way that we handle emotions properly is we report the feeling. Okay, here we're getting into basically the facts. Use statements like, I feel, not you are. You are impossible to deal with. Rather, what are you feeling? Okay, understand the difference? Honesty is the best policy. Be honest about your emotions. The Bible says in Ephesians 4:25, don't lie. I don't think that that's like a real stretch. People have to believe that it's in the Bible that you don't have to lie, right? Or that you shouldn't lie. Right? But that's also true with the way you feel. Don't lie about the way you feel. Speak the truth, even if it's uncomfortable in the moment. If you think that you are protecting your relationship by not sharing your true feelings, you're actually doing the opposite because you now have an area in your relationship where you don't have shared life, where you've said, nope, this is for me, and it's not for them. The next way that we handle our emotions properly is, and I pulled this because it's a specific verse in the Bible, be angry and do not sin. But it could be anything, whatever emotion. Be fearful and do not sin. Be stressed out and do not sin. Be happy and do not sin. Be elated, whatever it is, and do not sin. Now, it'd be very difficult for me to go through all the different ways that should look like. I just wanted to go through a couple of ways that it looks like for you to actually be angry and do sin so that we can avoid those things. So the number one way that we can do that is by looking for reinforcements or ruminating. That's like, I'm going to go find other people that I can say, do you know what my spouse did? Do you know what Tina just did? And get them to be on my side, right? That's gathering reinforcements. And then ruminating. Can I just sit there and think about how badly she treated me or what she did? And if I just sit there and I'm thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it and just ruminating on that and letting that stir around in my head, then next time I see her, how am I going to feel? I may have even blown it up way bigger than it ever was because I just allowed the thoughts to go. And man, when you just allow your thoughts to go on things, you will build, you will make. It's like taking a little thing and just start adding Play-Doh all around it and just keep sticking more and more stuff to it that never was really there until you've created this massive thing. That's ruminating, that's getting reinforcements. Don't do that. Another big no-no is no abuse. There's never a situation ever, where any type of abuse comes in. Of course, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, telling someone you don't care how they feel in this situation, telling them that they're stupid for feeling that way, belittling their feelings, not taking into account, because like what we had with the bug in the leaf thing, someone's reaction to a situation may be inappropriate to the situation, but it was not inappropriate to their perception of the situation. So we can never belittle someone's feelings, emotions, attitudes. So any of time that we do that, understand, I want to be serious about this, that falls into the category of abuse. So there is none of that. We've got to create safe spaces in our relationships for people to share. No mocking. Sometimes it can be fun to go for the joke at someone else's expense. But I can tell you that, yes, that was big for me early on in our marriage. And dating. I made her cry on our second date because of mocking that, but she still went out on a third date. So God is good. No mocking. Let me just tell you this about that, is it might be fun in the moment to go for a joke, and I understand that probably better than everyone here. But it is more fun to have a safe place where you have shared life. And if she feels safe to share with me and has that, I can tell you that's long-term far more fulfilling than that 25 seconds of giggling to myself about a joke I made. And the last thing that I want to say about in this category of be angry and do not sin is Ephesians 4:32 is good advice for life. Essentially, it says, be kind. In your marriage, be kind. Okay? That goes a long way.
It's really, really important to accept each other unconditionally. This applies to what your spouse does. It also applies to how your spouse feels. Feelings are facts. We've said this. They don't indicate spirituality. It's okay for you to feel how you feel. If that's the case, then it is also okay for your spouse to feel how they feel, and to give them that safe space to talk about it. Most emotions that you have, especially heavy emotions, have a deeper root to them, meaning, like Ryan said, they may have absolutely nothing to do with you, and so it may be triggering an emotional response learned from childhood. And so one of the ways that we as spouses serve each other is not to block that emotion so that you don't have to be a part of it, but to help them say, okay, you're feeling this way. Let's talk about why you're feeling this way. And let's, pray about it and bring healing into this area. That's very, very important. When we were first married, we were not making very much money at all. I wasn't working, and you were making like $7 an hour or something like that. And we were living in this townhouse, and the kitchen was one of the largest rooms in the house that didn't have carpet, of course, and we had no mop, and so I had to clean the floor with the bucket and sponge, and I did that like once, and I was done. And then I asked Ryan if we could buy a mop. It was $10. Our weekly budget for groceries was $30. That makes me feel really old. And he said no. You can imagine how well that went over. But his no on the surface may have been a caution about how, it's not in our budget, and it's a third of our grocery bill for the week, and we just can't afford it. But really, when it comes right down to it, it was a response of the financial fears that he had developed from when he was a child. And so we didn't know any of this stuff when we were first married, so we had no clue until years later that that's where this was coming from. But so it has a deeper root. Your responses may have a deeper root. And wives, when your husband responds that way, don't respond in kind, but actually maybe help them through that. And husbands, same thing. That's very, very important. And so these things that we do with these emotions do affect our relationship with each other, whether good or bad.
The next way that we handle emotions properly is to empathize with the other person. Empathy is not feeling sorry for someone else, but it's understanding why they're feeling this way. Or you can even go beyond understanding and help them through the emotion. There's a lot of different tools in the churches, and I'm not going to necessarily go into everything, but sometimes helping them find the deeper true feelings, the true reasons why they're feeling that way is even better than empathy. Sometimes it's especially difficult for men to understand or maybe want to understand what their wives are feeling. But men, that is a part of submission and a part of serving, and it's a part of caring about them.
We can exist in opposites. We can feel one thing and choose to do another. We can doubt God and we can follow him. We can be angry with our spouse and love them. Roger mentioned this last week. We don't have to feel love to give love. This is existing in opposites. When we want to lie, but we choose to tell the truth. And it doesn't mean that we're inauthentic or that we're being hypocritical. Like Roger said, this is not a fake it till you make it. But we are living in faith. And it's actually a sign of maturity to be able to exist in these opposites. It's part of maturity when you're feeling those heavy emotions, but you're choosing to love the other person in spite of those emotions and not choosing to respond to them in maybe those heavy emotions. You're not stuffing, you're not bottling, but you're properly handling these emotions. And the more mature you get when you can exist in those opposites, and especially the more practice you get at handling them properly, your emotional responses, you'll find, will come as a result of your value in Christ instead of your value for finding from the other person. You're not striving, you're not pulling life out of them, but you are receiving life from Christ, and you're able to give life and share life instead of sucking the life out of them.
All right. So handling emotions properly is your responsibility. How your spouse responds to that is not your responsibility. Okay? That's just something that's true in a lot of ways. It's also true that it's your responsibility to find your value in Christ and not in your spouse, but it's not your responsibility to make your spouse do that. Okay? So we went through a lot of stuff, and we went through it pretty quickly, and there was a lot of things there. So if this is something that you feel like, hey, I need something on, you can go back and watch the sermon online, or I'd make ourselves available to talk with you. But I just wanted to give you sort of 5 things in conclusion that I thought, hey, here's some good, just walk away with these things. And they're all things that were said while we were talking. Number 1, in conclusion, don't tell others how they should feel. Give them freedom to feel what they're feeling. Do not tell an anxious person that the Bible says, don't be anxious, because now you've just made them anxious and guilty. Instead, tell an anxious person, no matter how anxious they are, that you love them. True spirituality sets people free. It does not ever condemn someone. Okay? We love people. We do not judge people. Now, we can help them with their anxious, but the way to deal with an anxious person is not to just quote scripture out there and condemn them in the name of Jesus. Okay? That's not being spiritual. Number 2, actually identify what you are feeling. That is so important because emotions can mask as other emotions. Fear, guilt, nervousness very often mask as anger. Now, anger can be a real emotion just on its own. That's how Jesus felt at the temple when people were making his father's house a den of thieves. But oftentimes, other emotions, maybe emotions that we're more ashamed of, can mask as anger. And there's other ones too, other emotions that may come out. Number 3, share, don't dump. All right, just remember the bricks. Number 4, don't respond in the moment unless you know for sure that you can respond without interruption. Okay, bringing it up later is not drudging up the past. We often want to avoid uncomfortable conversations, but the outcome is a lot better than the uncomfortableness of not of when you go through it. Okay, it's better once you've gone through it. And I will tell you this: if you started to put this into practice at the very beginning, letting your emotions out with your spouse in the correct way, handling them properly, might feel really uncomfortable and really unnatural. But the more you do it, it will become very comfortable and very natural. And the bridges that are now built, that relationship strength that has increased, will be so worth it. I can't even, tell you how worth it that is. And the last thing, this should be a given, but in my experience, it's not. Number 5, be on your spouse's side. You are a team. You are not competitors. Make sure they know that and they feel that. Your spouse should know that if there's only one person in this world that's got their back, that's on their side, that will always, always, always lift them up, it should be their spouse. When you're in a relationship with someone, be on their side. Lift them up. Well, that's what we had for this. So I'm going to invite the worship team and the ministry team to come on back up. Roger, if you wanted to come up too. With the ministry team, and Tina and I are going to be down here, we want to especially invite anyone, if you feel like, if you're in a relationship, and again, this is not just have to just be marriage, but if you're in a relationship and you've just felt like you've struggled with that you've maybe have a history of hiding feelings, bottling them up, or dumping, whatever, we just invite you to come and get prayer, and go ahead and let's let Jesus handle some of these things. Let's go ahead and let the Father handle many of these things.
This had to be the number one marriage talk I've ever heard. And listen to this again. It was very deep. It was real. It's a life experience. I mean, as soon as he started speaking, it was like this week, even this stuff coming up. But this is what I saw, the Lord giving me a picture when Ryan and Tina were talking about the bricks. Saw a picture of couples either building that wall that divides with the bricks, or some that are building houses around them with the bricks. But we don't want a house, we want a home. So a lot of us have houses that we live in, but we don't have a home. So the Lord is wanting us to surrender these things to Him, that He can take control of. So let's all stand and worship and offer it up to the Lord.